Our third talk in the series, The Physiology of Aging, will focus on the central nervous system. At the end of this lecture, you will be able to discuss the differences in neurological function between older and younger people and describe how these differences account for the way older people with CNS problems present, why they do worse than younger people, and the long-term consequences of brain injury in older people. 88-year-old Mr. Ahmed was found at the bottom of the stairs by his daughter. He is known to have dementia. He opens his eyes to voice. He is not speaking, and this is said to be normal for him when you speak to his daughter. A CT scan is ordered, but as is often the case in our busy departments, this has been delayed. The patient then has a seizure in the department. He is eventually brought under control and sent for his CT, and this is his CT scan. His daughter then tells you that he is also on warfarin. So I want you just to pause the video for a second and think about these questions. How would this patient's clinical presentation be different from that of a younger person? How would his dementia and his warfarin affect his injury? And how is this patient's neuropsychiatric response to injury different from a younger person? The anatomy of the brain in an older person differs from that on a younger person. There is cerebral atrophy, which creates more space around the brain. The vasculature is fragile with an increased risk of bleeding, and there are watershed areas between the main blood supplies to the brain, leading to tenuous blood supply in those areas and increasing the risk of ischemia in those areas. There are also memory changes that occur as part of aging. Older people do have some difficulty with factual memory, and this can affect their overall mental function. However, any alteration in mentation, orientation, and cognition should be considered as pathological in the older patient. Older people may take a bit longer to process things mentally, but their overall mental capacity is usually pretty much the same as a younger adult. There is something called a decreased functional plasticity. That is to say, the ability for the central nervous system to compensate for injuries is far less than in a younger person. Many times in a younger person, even quite serious injuries can be compensated for by the brain, and normal brain function may develop even in the presence of quite significant injuries to specific parts of the brain. This ability is lost in the older person, and therefore long-term consequences of brain injury are more deleterious in older people because recovery is far less than in a younger person with a similar injury. And when I say brain injury, I both mean in terms of traumatic injury, an injury to the brain due to medical problems such as hemorrhagic strokes or ischemic strokes. So this leads to these changes in anatomy and physiology lead to delayed presentation in older people. As, for example, subdural hematomas expand in an older person, because the brain has shrunk, there is more space for this lesion to expand before it causes pressure on the brain or increased intracranial pressure, and therefore symptoms present later. However, if the patient presents later, it stands to reason that the outcome is worse. And as we discussed before, there is poor functional recovery. Patients often do not recover fully from their brain injuries, and the degree of functional recovery is far less than in a younger person. So When we think about this patient, the interaction between the changes in CNS function and CNS anatomy have a significant impact on the older person's ability to deal with a brain injury and the ability to recover from that brain injury. If you have any questions or comments, you can post them on the WhatsApp TTEMA group, or you can post them on the TTEMA website. In summary, there are structural and functional changes with aging that affect the anatomy and functioning of the brain. This can lead to late presentations in older people with CNS injuries and illnesses and poor functional recovery. Our final talk in this series will focus on musculoskeletal injuries and the physiology of the musculoskeletal system with aging.